Howdy, and welcome to the Buckcast episode 0. In this episode, I'll be introducing myself as a Yu-Gi-Oh player and the direction of this podcast moving forward. I'm Buck, and I'm a pseudo-competitive player. I had a stretch of regular attendance at my locals where I usually won. That was during toss format. But I've never actually been to a regionals. I'd broadly call myself a budget player. I'd be hard-pressed to spend more than $30 on a really important staple. And in general, I won't spend more than $100 on a deck. The most that I've ever spent on a card is $50 on an Access Code Talker during the pandemic. I like playing decks that remind me of Salad because that was my first competitive deck. So I have kind of this bias towards these more mid-ranged sort of strategies. But I also have a fondness for more interesting control decks that are very high skill, even though I'm not a particularly skilled player myself. As far as this podcast goes, I plan on bringing friends in to talk about just what decks they like playing and what they think of the game at this current moment, including Master Duel, Duel Links, TCG, maybe even OCG, and all the other formats. Who knows, maybe we'll even talk about Sevens or Cross Duel. But it's mostly just an outlet to discuss the game broadly and talk about our histories with it. And for me, that history goes all the way back to a certain structure deck that I bought in a comic book store. My parents gave me some money. I went to a comic book store, and instead of buying comics, I bought the Atlantean structure deck. Now, I bought it somewhere between 2013 and 2015, and I didn't know till much later that it came out in 2012. And the next structure deck I got was the Dragoonity structure deck, sometime between 2013 and 2015, and that one came out in 2011. I had no idea what was going on in the game. I just played with my friends in my mostly middle school days, and that was the game for me. That was all there was. At some point, someone told us about the ban list, and how to properly play the game, and then I went about teaching others, but I had no grasp of what the competitive world was like. But then at some point in 2016, I bought the Monarch structure deck, and then, I started buying cards online in 2016, which was mostly just upgrades for my Dragoonity deck and my Atlantean deck. And I remember the cards I bought actually didn't make the deck much better. The Atlantean deck got way better. But the Dragoonity deck, I actually ended up putting cards in it that just did not help me at all. That was a very important learning moment for me about how much I needed to test before I went and bought cards. But then in 2017, I happened to be in a Walmart somewhere, and they were selling the Monarch structure deck and the DDD structure deck. And I bought both of them, and they became my best decks, and I mostly played the DDD one. And then I ended up making a friend in high school who played ABC, and he wasn't very competitive. In all of my time playing Yu-Gi-Oh, I was the most competitive player, but looking back on it, again, I had no grasp of the competitive scene. So now that I look at my friends that I've made in college, for instance, I realize just how uncompetitive of a player I am. But at the time, I was the competitive one, so I would actually help people build decks. I would theory craft using Yugipedia to put together just the perfect 40-card list to make something that I thought was cool. And then I'd play against them, and I'd be like, no, you made the wrong play. You were supposed to do this. You're supposed to do that. I might have annoyed them a little bit by having to play their decks for them, but I had a lot of fun. And then in 2019, somewhere between then and 2017, 2019, I started really watching YugiTube. I watched people like Simo and DZeef, maybe MBT at that time. And then I got all this info about, the Salad structure deck is going to be absolutely insane. And I looked into it, and I went and got my girlfriend to buy 3 structure decks from Barnes & Noble, I think, as a gift for me, which was really cool. And it was really cool of her. That was my first competitive deck, really, was Salad. And then I spent far too much money on Sunlight Wolves because I'm an idiot and bought them when they were hyped up. But I had a lot of fun with Salad. That was when I first started going to locals, because I felt like I finally had I first started going to locals with the DD. The first deck I ever brought to locals was DDD. And I was just making, the arc pass. It was not good. But, I mean, it meant that I'd win against the other literal child who was there. So I was kind of happy with it at the time. But when I finally got Salad, I finally was able to compete seriously. And those were good days for me as a Yu-Gi-Oh player. But then, as I kept getting more and more involved, sometime between March and July, I bought Trickstar. And then when the Megatons came out, the 2019 Megatons, I got my Nibiru's, and I got the Striker cards that were in there, and I finally built Striker. And then I got the True Draco cards, because the True Draco Striker crazy, I don't want to call it combo deck, but it was insane. And I played that, and I thought, this is the most insane deck that has ever existed. And it's so resilient to the ban list, because if they just ban Striker or if they ban True Draco, I'll just pivot to the other strategy. And then they hit both. So suddenly all of my decks were terrible. Always a good learning experience, I suppose. And then I bought the Shaddoll structure deck when that came out, and I bought the Invoked core to go with it, and I played Shaddoll Invoked for a while. And then when the Rocket structure deck came out, I also bought 3 of those, but I never built a very good deck with it. I don't remember when that was exactly. Although I do remember talking to some guys at the card shop who were much older than me, and they bought the structure deck and were trying to put something together. And they asked me what I thought of a certain card. I think it was Squib Draw. And they were asking if it was good. And I was like, I don't think it really facilitates the game plan of Rockets as a strategy. And he took my advice and decided not to play it. And it felt very cool to me that this guy he played very competitive decks, but he just hadn't kept up with what was going on with the Rocket cards. But he thought my opinion was worthwhile enough to build his deck to my recommendation, which at the time I thought was really cool. Anyway, back to Shaddoll Invoked. I actually bought Dragoon when that Megaton came out, because I thought it was going to be a good investment, and I played it in my Shaddoll Invoked deck. In hindsight, I really didn't use my Dragoon very much, and it was a huge relief when I did get to sell it and make a profit. I don't remember how much I bought it for or sold it for, but I know I made a profit, and That's all I wanted out of that card. And then in November, when Meow Mew came out, I built Prankids, and I felt so smart when I bought my 3 Prankids Field Spell before Meow Mew came out, because it cost me nothing. And then after Meow Mew came out, it was so expensive. At least for me at that time, it seemed like it was really expensive. So I played Prankids for a very long time. I was really annoyed, though, eventually when the adventure cards came out, and then Prankids got hit. As a pure Prankids player, I was very upset that my deck, which was more or less fair, had been hit in this way. It made me very sad. Anyway, over the pandemic, like I said, I bought my Access Code Talker. I think it was probably the Crush Card video that convinced me to buy it. And that's... Access Code Talker has been an absolute huge help for me all of these years that I've had it. It's been a very good card, to say the least, about Access Code. But I also discovered I guess we'd call it my pet deck over the pandemic, which was Magispector. I really thought that the whole gimmick of Magispector, that they're all little dragoons, they're untargetable, indestructible, was really funny. But also the fact that they all get you a plus on summon, but then that all their spell and traps are minuses, so it kind of evens out. I don't know. I really liked the idea of the deck, and I thought it was such an interesting way to use the pendulum mechanic. So I bought Magispector, and I looked around, and I was like, oh, okay, the best version of Magispector is Wind Witch Magispector, so that's what I got. And I played Wind Witch Magispector for a long time. Well, I still play Wind Witch Magispector as my fun deck. I always bring it with me, especially when I'm playing against newer players and stuff. And then in 2021 was the next time I really spent money on cards, all the way in November when I got Flunder. And I bought Flunder because it was budget. And this goes into me being, again, more of a budget player. Even if a deck isn't exactly what I want, if it's competitive and it's the budget deck, it's probably when I'm going to be playing that format. So I bought Flunder, and I played Flunder for a while, but boy, do I hate inconsistent decks. So I really didn't have that much fun with Flunder, but it was what it was. And I still have my Flunder deck, and I still pull it out every now and again. But then when Master Duel came out, that was a lot of fun. I really liked building Leerlisk Tri-Brigade when that first came out, and comboing. And then I remember switching to the Zodiac version and thinking that was just a lot of fun. It felt, even though it might maybe be more of a control deck, it felt a lot like my kind of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I remembered from TOS format, where it kind of feels like there's a lot of back and forth. Even if in the end you steamroll them, there's a lot of moments where it feels very close, and I really like that sort of gameplay. And then when the Sword Soul stuff came out in Master Duel, I played Sword Soul for the first time, and it's very linear, but I'm not exactly the most big brain person in Yu-Gi-Oh! So I actually had a lot of fun with that, especially steamrolling other Sword Soul players, because low-ranked Master Duel is full of literal babies. I do not know how people can be so bad at Yu-Gi-Oh! On an automatic simulator, but people are pretty good at that. And then when the adventure stuff came out in Master Duel, I was excited because now I could finally play Adventure Prankid, that I'd never been able to play in the TCG because it was too expensive. And then also I got to play with the DPE engine, both in the Invoked and in my Prankid deck. So Master Duel for me a lot of it has just been being able to have fun because I finally can afford the best deck of the format. And I think that's just really cool. That said, of course, there are many, many problems with the Master Duel format, especially best of ones. And I'm sure that there will be lots and lots to talk about with Master Duel moving forward. But let's go ahead and just lay out probably an old list I wrote down of what I wanted the Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list to be for Master Duel. And we'll see how well these takes aged and how well they'll age in the future. So here what I have written is, banned is Maxi, Auroradon, Verte, Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds, IO, Skill Drain, Emptiness, Calamities, Tomahawk, Block Dragon. Well, I think that holds up pretty well. If I remember correctly, Hauka Fibrex just got banned as of the recording of this video. So the Auroradon hit seems kind of redundant at this point. Although I was very surprised that they banned Hulk instead of the Auroradon or the 001 or any of the other things. I'm not going to say it was overstepping, because I think it was probably a very good idea for the health of the Master Duel format. But it was a very interesting approach. But for some reason, Tomahawk, I believe, is still illegal, which just lets you go into the Auroradon combos anyway. So that seems like a bit of an oversight. And I think, if I remember correctly, they just put all the floodgates to 2, which seems sort of silly. In my list, here we have the limited list, is Gozen, Rivalry, Tikbu, and Summon Limit. I thought it'd make a lot more sense to put them at 1, so that there are just like 4 floodgates in the whole deck, instead of them being able to play, a fourth or a quarter. Well, that's the same thing. Or a third, however many, just an absurd amount of floodgates. And by having this diversity of floodgates, it kind of makes it so no matter what, they're going to have to play a floodgate that they don't like to play with. I thought that would have been a better balancing act, but we'll see how the format develops and what sort of decks will be viable. In general, I think the problem with Master Duel is just all of these really, really cheesy combo decks and FTKs. I got Stein FTK'd the other day when I was playing Master Duel, and it's just so upsetting, because it's like, I know that this is not consistent. I know you're losing to people who drew 1 hand trap. I know you attempted this against 10 other people, and they got a free win because you looked at your hand and scooped because you'd bricked. Why did I have to be the guy, the 11th man, who happened to not have a hand trap while you had your perfect opening 5 cards? Ugh. Why has it got to be me? And so some amount of cheesy FTKs are always going to be in the format, and that's not a bad thing, because sometimes cheesy FTKs are just kind of fun. But I think there are too many of them, and they are too good right now in Master Duel. If anything, I think if we are going to allow any of them to remain in the format, I think that an Exodia FTK of some kind would probably be preferable, because at least then they get a really cool animation versus just the lame old, some sort of burn strategy. Well, as far as the TCG goes, I'd like to begin by apologizing to my past and future self. Just apologize to myself for buying MathMech. That, in hindsight, is a very silly decision, because I could buy cheap Tier Element for the same amount and have a much better deck. So I guess the budget player in me just made a very silly mistake, especially now that the 10s have come out and Small World has been reprinted. There is a very fun Small World bridge in the Gamma Seal to turn any of the Tier Elements into Rhino Heart, which seems like a fair enough replacement for the field spell. But even then, if you play something like the Danger variant, you maybe don't even need a replacement for the field spell. You can just play more good cards, and that'll get you there most of the time. But I don't actually particularly like the branded budget variant of Tier Element, where they're playing the supplement or whatever. The one that reveals a fusion monster in your extra deck and lets you special summon a material from the deck, but you're locked into fusions. I think that the Tier Element cards just facilitate so many types of extra deck plays that locking yourself into fusion is just such a hard minus on the cap, the ceiling of the deck, that I'm just not interested. It also makes your plays a lot more linear and boring, when instead you could be making curious and playing the lottery a bit more. I think that's just more fun, and also probably more competitive, because you get to go into things like Redoer, and then you have Zeus follow-up, and all of this sort of thing. I think that's probably a better strategy. And if the field spell gets reprinted, you are much closer to the best possible variants of the deck, rather than having to go out and get all of these other external sort of cards. You have everything you need. You just need to replace those extra good cards with the field spell if it ever gets reprinted. And it's also, I feel like it's more flexible to changing formats instead of the branded version that has a lot more engine requirements that you just have to play. I don't know. Time will tell. Time will tell. In general, the format, I'm not a huge fan of Splight. I think it's really dumb that they get to have the most bizarre Nibiru protection possible and also be able to use Toad twice. That just seems ridiculous to me. The fact that they also have Spell and Trap, that is a disruption on the opponent's turn in Smashers, it just feels way too pushed and way too uninteresting for me for a top deck. So I really hope they rein in the power level of it. Whereas Tiers feel a lot more interesting, at least. Sure, it's a combo wombo deck, but the fact that it has a random element to it, I think is actually a good thing, because it's just a lot more interesting. You're kind of engaged even as the opponent, because you obviously if you have some sort of disruption, you can really have to think about where you're going to plop it, and probably try to anticipate based off of, are they starting with Dangers, or are they starting with Rhino Heart, or what? Try to where you want that disruption to be placed. And even if you kind of chalk it up, it all depends so much on the hand, it's just luck, then you can still kind of pretend it is the lottery for you, and every time they mill, you look and you see them only milling Dangers, and then you get to say, woohoo! I've won the lottery, you didn't mill anything important, only for them to kick Kalos, summon Merly, mill 8, and then they hit every single name, and that's kind of fun. I think that sort of thing. Now, obviously, there'll be bad days where they hit every single mill and they do perfect. They have a Snow in the graveyard with, 3, can summon itself 3 times to a Topologic Bomber Zone, and it just feels completely unwinnable. But that's Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think it's a lot more fun than the... Oh, don't mind that. I think it's a lot more fun than the Sprite deck and matchup. What concerns me the most, though, is that Sprite is just becoming an engine into your element. The fact that they're just playing Gigantic Splight to then, and maybe even the Runic cards, to just summon a Jet to just grab a Smasher so that they can play through Dark Ruler no more and more. I think that is very concerning. I'm not really sure what can be done about that, but to me that feels very, very dangerous for the health of the game. The fact that they aren't even going for, Salic as their own in-archetype way of having more disruptions. No, they're going for Salic and Smashers so that they can 100% win through a Dark Ruler anymore, instead of just having an insurance policy. And that scares me for how high the power level of the current format is getting. We all knew it was going to be high, but I'm a little concerned about just how high it's going to get. And I think one thing that definitely could happen, because all the cards are so new, it's really, you can't hit them directly. And I don't even think it's fair to hit them indirectly yet. Probably have to wait a little longer. So I'd recommend on the next ban list, we just take a bunch of crap off. I've been a long advocate for the MBT style, take as many things off the ban list as humanly possible. For instance, I am not scared at all about Blaster or even Tidal coming off the ban list. In fact, that's the next segment. Let's just scroll through the ban list and talk about the cards that I think don't need to be on here anymore. And feel free in the comments to tell me how wrong I am and send me replays of what sort of degenerate stuff is possible if we take these cards off the list. But I think Blaster can totally go to 1. Cyberjar to 1. Cyberjar, I think Empty Jar is funny. Even if we somehow made Empty Jar viable, I wouldn't even care. First of all, allowing your opponent to draw into all their hand traps just inherently seems like a horrible FTK. But even if it succeeds, it's a really funny FTK that just has not been a thing. For instance, like the Runic cards are supposed to be a deck your opponent out deck, but of course they never do that. And it's really disappointing because I feel like deck out is such an interesting win condition that we could really afford to explore more, but instead we're just because of the fact that it's an FTK, I think, Konami's just too afraid of printing decent cards for it. And instead we get these Runic cards that are too generic so that they aren't completely terrible, but then that ends up just making them fair enough good cards to throw into other strategies like they are right now. I think that was a very bad misstep on their part. Anyway, other than that, I wonder if Eclipse Wyvern can come off. I'm not certain about that, but I wonder, what are you realistically... That seems like a lot of setup to grab something, and I'm not really sure what the payoff for that is. Fiber Jar, I think 100% can come off. Completely ridiculous. Doesn't even facilitate Empty Jar. I don't know why people would play this card. As a recovery card, it kind of seems terrible. So I don't know why it's even on the list. It seems kind of just terrible and bad. Kieran could probably come off. You might be thinking, oh, he's a Magispector enjoyer. That's why he wants Kieran off. No. Kieran is actually terrible in Magispector. You can't Pendulum Summon him. You have to unironically Tribute Summon him, unless you're willing to play some really, really terrible trap cards to facilitate summoning him. And he doesn't even really fit with Gimmick very much. So Kieran, I have no Magispector related biases towards letting him off, but as a advocate for diversifying the pendulum mechanic, I think it'd be fun to take him off and see maybe if we could get some cool pendulum decks that are willing to play him, or maybe even search him. And that kind of brings me into my pendulum philosophy in general, which will become more relevant as we continue through this list. I actually think Electromite should stay banned forever, because I think it is way too centralizing of a card for the pendulum mechanic. I think as long as Electromite exists, the only good pendulum deck will be Good Stuff Pendulum, which I think is just such a waste of a very interesting mechanic, although maybe a bit convoluted. So I think that instead we should just take basically all of the pendulum cards we can off the list, except Electromite, and try to facilitate a diversity of different pendulum decks that do different things. And part of that, I think Kieran coming off could facilitate something like that. The next one is Harpor. I think Harpor could go to 1. Orcus is just kind of terrible. I have not seen an Orcus player not brick for so long. I think the problem is that Orcus players are so focused on the crazy boards they can make, they forget that they also have to, draw a combo, and they end up putting so many bricks in their deck. I think that taking Harpor off will only make the brick problem worse for those players, but it also might facilitate people to go towards a more mid-rangey style Orcus deck, like from TOS format, and I think that'd be very interesting. Plushfire is a little bit dangerous for pendulum cards to come off, but I think putting at 1 would be very interesting, and if it does cause a problem, we can always just ban it again. People like to make fun of Konami for the Snatch Steal debacle, when they pulled it off and then immediately had to put it back on again, but I personally think that Konami should do that more often. What's the harm? We get one fun format where we realize how absolutely busted a card is, and then everyone plays it. And then obviously it's busted, so it's going to get banned again. I don't really see the harm. I just think I think it's actually a very cool thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! That we have these old cards that you really can't know how good they are until you put them in context. And then people get to innovate and figure out how busted it is. I think cards should move on and off the ban list more frequently. The one Dragon Ruler I'm not willing to take off, though, is Redox. Redox is way too busted. There are way too many Earth monsters. I just don't think it's safe to take him off. But Tidal, on the other hand, I think is perfectly fine to put to 1. I think when we think realistically, are we going to see all of these Dragon Rulers put into a Dragon Link sort of deck? I don't think so. They already had Tempest, and at first they played it, and now it's just completely cut from the lists. The long-term advantage you get off of playing them, I think, is just completely irrelevant to the power level you can get from playing other similar cards, even if they don't have that longevity. Cards like Victory Dragon and stuff, I think we should just pull off of the ban list. It already is a card that you can't use in the duels. People should already know that. There are already so many match-winning cards that are not illegal. There is no question. It's just not a game mechanic. So there's no reason to allow Victory Dragon to exist. I mean, there's no reason to put it on the list when already mechanically it's essentially banned. So there's no reason to take up space. Elder Entity Norden is very interesting. I think he's a very cool card. Of course, he is definitely way too busted. I know some of you, when I said his name, immediately thought I was going to say that he was somehow okay for the game and we're panicking. But I think that what we want from Norden is probably retrains that are much more targeted. I think some sort of water deck version of Norden that maybe allows you to bring back Dragoons to then use Bahamut Shark to get your search, like it was played during the time period, but it's locked into that strategy somehow or another, I think would be very cool. Colossus is an interesting thing where I think if it went to 1, that'd be very interesting, but cards like Nemesis Corridor and such make it very concerning. If we could find a way to tailor it so that it is mostly played in pure Thunder Dragon decks, that'd be great, but I'm just unconvinced that it won't become part of Monster Mash combo decks, and I don't think that'd be an improvement for the game, so I think it's better to leave it banned for now. As far as Meow Moo can come back to 1. Haters will say I'm biased because I am, but I just think it can come back to 1 and it won't really be a problem. I think that Prankids are past their prime because they are just so disruptible in this modern high-powered format. I don't even know if they have enough power on the crackback. They can't push through enough disruptions. I just really don't see the issue. Ancient Fairy Dragon is a very interesting card. I am not quite sure what the problem with Ancient Fairy Dragon is. If I remember correctly, it was banned because of a field spell deck that I thought was hilarious and did not want to see banned. So I don't know what people would use Ancient Fairy Dragon for today. I mean, you could say Searching Mystic Mine, but that's not very good for a combo deck. So I really don't know. Maybe it's a bit too strong with its special summon effect. This might be another needing a retrain situation where specific archetypes, such as the Union archetype or Union theme, need their own retrains of Ancient Fairy Dragon that are more specific. And then we can enjoy the interesting parts of this card without having to sacrifice the wide playability of it. Dinglong, I'm too scared of. It's in Master Duel. I think maybe the play is just to delay banning it in Master Duel and hit other cards around it. And if it's still a problem, then ban it. And then that'll inform our opinion here in the TCG about whether or not it's a safe card to come off. And then next up is Ptolemaeus, the Teller Knight that ranks up into infinity. Why is this card here? This card is terrible. This card does not need to be on the ban list. Please prove me wrong, but I just don't see it. Making infinity is good and all, but it's not that crazy. And then Zenmaedi. Pretty simple. I advocate for the Reddit swap. Zenmaedi to 1, ban Wind-Up Hunter. I think it could be a really cool link spam deck. I don't see the problem with that. I think Dryden could probably come back to 1 because those sorts of control style decks just aren't good enough anymore. I could be very wrong, but I don't really see the issue. I feel like Dryden was just about to get power crept when it got banned, and in hindsight, it was a very silly thing to do. Next up would be lots of really busted cards that you can't pull off. Snatch Steal, again, I thought that was really funny. I wonder if it's okay to take it off now because it's arguably just a worse Change of Heart. Then again, Change of Heart being at 1 when Mind Control isn't even at 3 was a weird pick to begin with. So I really think that has more to do with what they think up at Konami about what is good and what isn't. In general, these sorts of going second interesting cards I am not against. I think that Snatch Shield could probably come to 1 and it wouldn't be a big issue. Spellbook of Judgment, I think, can definitely come to 1. I definitely don't see any problem with this. Spellbooks are terrible, and there's really no reason. This probably could come back to 3 tomorrow, and at worst, it tops a regional. I don't see the problem here. That Aggressive Screener is a very high-rolly card, which is what some people don't like about it, but I think it's just really fun. I've heard that part of the reason it got banned was because it slowed down events so much, having to deck check 60 card decks and having to deal with grass shenanigans. If that's the case, then I don't know, get good. I feel like the ban list is not a place for those sorts of changes. I understand what they're going for, but I think there are better ways to fix that than to just ban the card. I think that's more of a systemic problem on their part. But it might be too busted, but I'm not sure. I think Barrage should stay banned, though, for the Zodiac terrain. And then, now we're on to the limited card, Astrograph Sorcerer to 2. Why not? Just give it a chance, see what happens. The dangers are really good right now, so I think I'm going to leave them where they are. But I think Pink to 2 would be very interesting. Going second's really hard in this format, so I'd be very curious to see what would happen if we bumped it up just to 2 copies. Because at 2 copies, I think people might be willing to play it in the main or side deck. And then we get to really remember just how crazy Pinkertops is. That'd also kind of be a counter to Runic strategies. Because what makes Pink so good is that he's such a big body and can attack. And that means that you can't use him and your Runic cards in the same turn, really. So it's kind of a trade-off that I don't think people currently have, of being able to play cards that facilitate going second instead of playing Runic cards. I think that could be very interesting. Exodia pieces, all the Exodia pieces can go to 3 tomorrow. I have been told it's a lore thing. Lore can eat a shoe. I don't care. It should not be taking up space on this list. It should not be giving new players the impression that it is somehow good, which is mostly what I have seen it do, especially as my time as a new player. Birdman is very interesting. I think it should probably stay at 1 just because I don't know what would happen. But I'd be willing to hear arguments for and against him. I just haven't made up my mind. Misk to 1 for like moving it up to 2 or something. I don't really know. Dino doesn't really do anything, but I don't really know if that has anything to do with Dino. I think the power level is just too high, and if we gave it 2, I'm not sure it would really change anything. I guess it could make going second with Dino better, but I'm not sure if that's a good thing. I know a lot of people are just sick of Dino because it's been good for so long. So maybe not yet, but sometime soon, I think Miscellaneousaurus might see itself moving back up on the ban list, or at least it might be deserving of being moved to 2 or 3 copies in sometime in the not too far future. Morphing Jar, I think, again, I'm not scared of Ampy Jar. I think it's kind of funny. So I think Morphing Jar could definitely go to 2. I think even if we did take Saber Jar off the same list we put Morphing Jar to 2, it wouldn't matter. Monkey Board, I think it's still too early to see how much of an effect this card has. So I think we want to wait a little bit. Phantom Skyblaster is very interesting because there are so many good normal summons now to facilitate link spamming. I'm not sure if he's good enough anymore. Because all he does is trigger on normal summon. I'm not really sure how you would go about doing that without just playing it and just hoping you draw it in not one of your better normal summons. I really don't know how you would abuse Phantom Skyblaster to do something better than just playing one of the really strong normal summons that exists in the game right now. So I'd be very curious to see what would happen if we put it to, say, 2 cards to see what would happen. Spiral cards are interesting because without Master Plan, it seems kind of just unnecessary to have any of them hit. But I really don't know. Spiral is one of those decks that out of nowhere can be good. So I don't know what the last card to have moved for the Spirals is, but I think just taking it slow to pull those cards off is probably the best strategy. Gazelle can definitely be bumped up. Gazelle is part of Salad, and I love Salad, so I'm biased. But also, it just doesn't seem particularly strong right now. And it's a very good consistency improvement to have more Gazelles. It allows you to be less afraid when you activate Pot of Desires, for instance. But the deck doesn't need Gazelle. It's mostly just a power boost, which is probably what the deck needs right now. And then Servant of Endymion, again, Pendulum, kind of bad right now. I'd be willing to put this at 2. Terratop, I don't know if people would play this card if they had the option to play it with a 3-1 ratio. But at this point, there are so many cards that allow you maybe to search it that it might be an issue. I really don't know. I'd be very interested to see if we put Terratop to 2, what would happen. Just because then it's a 2-1 Garnet ratio. Is that good enough? I don't know. I'd be curious to find out. Yada can go to 3. Easy peasy. We already know it's terrible. It's not doing anything. I wonder if Gem Knight FTK will ever be good again. I don't know if putting Diamond to 2 changes anything, so I'm not going to, but my Gem Knight players can tell me, whether or not that actually matters. I am sick and tired of Dragon Link, so I actually might want Strike Dragon just banned, just so that deck never exists ever again. Even though it's not good right now. That's just kind of a spite ban, I guess. For the Synchro Spam stuff, like Omega and Hyper Librarian, I don't see why they're still on the list. Synchro Spam is terrible, especially this sort of hand loop decks just aren't good. I don't see the issue. Shooting Regidragon that just got hit, I have no idea why they did that, so I don't really have a comment. Beatrice is kind of scary because of non-Burning Abyss strategies that might try to use it. And that does concern me. If only Burning Abyss could play 3 Beatrice, I'd be all about it. I'd say this card should definitely be at 3. But at the same time, I wonder, if it is at more than 1 copy, who is summoning more than 1 Beatrice? Because what we're worried about here is the combo players, and maybe VW specifically, summoning more than one of them on the first turn to do something. But with cards like Curious and Shooting Regidragon, I am not sure that's a concern anymore, because if it was that good for them to do it, they'd probably be finding a way to do it. So I want a hesitant Beatrice to 2 here. Emerald can go to 1,000,000 copies. It's not good. I think Lyrilusc Recital Nightingale is another one of those things that got hit right before it got power crept, and I don't think it needs to stay at 1. I think putting it 2 so they can do the Utopic Future Play again is fine. I really don't see a problem with that. Call by the Grave is interesting because I am somewhat on the side of 3 or 0 for this card, because it's just such a strong card, and either people are going to have to always play around it, or they shouldn't have to play around it. I think the problem with Call by the Grave is that even if your opponent doesn't have a hand trap, it's still just an incredible card. And I think that probably makes it too strong. I'm not going to advocate for its ban, but I don't think I would want it to change anywhere on the list. Card Destruction, I think, is bad. A terrible card, because putting your opponent's cards in the graveyard is absolutely crazy good for them. Like, almost regardless of what they are, just how the game is right now, I think Card Destruction will almost always be very, very bad for the person who activated it. So I think that Card Destruction could go to a higher number of copies without any problem. Chain Strike, Burn does not exist. I think that this card could go to 3 today, and it wouldn't change anything. And if Burn became a very, very, very rogue strategy, I wouldn't mind. I think that it is a very interesting check on Monster Mash formats to have a strategy like Chain Strike that just operates on a completely different axis. Kind of rein in the extremes of a format. I think that Chain Burn, Chain Strike should definitely go to 3. I don't think that's an issue of any kind. Divine Wind and Mist Valley, I have never seen this card do anything impressive. I think that the cards that facilitated it being good are also on the ban list, so I really don't know what people would do with this. Being able to summon wind monsters from your deck seems good, but it's so hard to get to Divine Wind and then get to that field spell and then be able to trigger it multiple times that it just seems like there are better things you could be doing with that much investment. So I think you could probably go to 2. Draco Face-Off, again, my kind of pendulum idea. I think this card could go to 2 and would definitely be a good thing. Dragonic Diagram, I think, is still a little too soon to come back to 2, just because I feel like being able to destroy your own cards might have some interesting but problematic implications. I think maybe actually Vista Starfrost might be an interesting analog, and we'll see how good that card is in modern times as the format moves forward. And if that card can't really accomplish anything, then maybe Dragonic Diagram can move up to 2 or 3. Final Countdown, I don't really see the issue with having more Final Countdown, especially if Mystic Mine gets banned, which is a very likely thing to happen right now, and if it's not likely, it should happen anyway. So I think that Mystic Mine should be banned, and then Final Countdown can go to however many copies people like. Gateway of the Six, I am very curious to see, isn't it at 3 in the OCG? If it is, then I think this card should definitely move up, but I'm not 100% certain. And then for Magical Midbreaker Field, I think is very odd. I don't really think it's a very good card. I think it just kind of ignores the fact that the game has changed. There is such a diversity of ways to interrupt someone's first turn combo and Magical Midbreaker Field only hits a very specific subset of that I feel like is really not very good. But again, feel free to correct me in the comments. Mind Control, I think Mind Control can move up, especially now that Change of Heart's legal. I think that Mind Control do 2 could actually facilitate some very cool going second decks or like things. Or just maybe even just a very generic sort of side deck that just plays a bunch of going second power cards. I think that could be very interesting. Sekka's Light should go to 3. I'm not even going to say put it to. I'm saying put it to 3. You lose so much by not being able to play any Speller Traps. And it's such an interesting deck choice decision. I think more cards like Sekka's Light should exist. And if people think that Sekka's Light is too strong, I think that Sekka's Light should come back to 3, and then that should be dealt with using card releases. Print more cards that punish people for not having spell traps in their deck, or maybe side deck cards that accomplish the same goal. So that people will just make it riskier. Don't remove that option. I think the Sky Striker cards are probably okay where they are. Maybe putting multi-roll to 2, probably wouldn't do anything. So that's probably a good step if we want to just very lightly increase the power level. Slash Draw shouldn't be on the ban list. Put that to 3. I don't think I need to even explain that. Time Seal can go to 3. That card is terrible. Dynamite Knight can probably go to 3. It hasn't really done anything. I think it's wild that they put Vincent to do. I have a personal vendetta against Drytron, so I think that it should go to 0 or back to 1 or something, because I just hate Drytron. If they want to ban Alpha, that'd also be a great option. Tinky at 2, I think it could come back to 3, but I don't really think there's a reason to move it one way or the other, so I think I'd leave it alone. Same goes for like Nadir Servant. Nadir Servant with the new Garuda card is probably really good, so I don't think we should probably move it, but it's just an interesting thing to think about moving forward. And Fusion Destiny, Verity's banned, put it back to 3. Maybe then people will play it. Desires at 2. I've noticed it actually kind of matters, which is very funny, even though people were already doing this when it was at 3, but I just think it's fine where it is. The Light Stage should definitely come to 3. Trick Stars are terrible. This card is cool because it facilitates getting you a monster and interrupting your opponent's back row. But that's just kind of like a worse Runic, and Runic is way more degenerate. So I feel like giving people the option to play Trick Stars instead to facilitate the same sort of thing is actually probably a good thing. And then Wall of Revealing Light can come to 3. That card is not doing anything. So that's my current ban list assessment, I suppose. And I think I ended up talking about a lot of different things on the way through there that you might have plenty of objections or talk about. And I think that, I don't know, I think I left y'all with a lot of meat there to really gobble up and tell me how wrong I am. And please do tell me how wrong I am. I fully understand that I, as a only pseudo-competitive player, am not correct about a lot of things in Yu-Gi-Oh! And my opinions are very untested in that way. So I'd be very happy to see some involvement to correct my ideas. I think that'd be really cool. Especially in the future when maybe I will, reply to those comments almost certainly. If anyone actually comments, I will basically certainly mention it, if not in episode 1, because that one might be recorded before this one goes up. In episode 2, then I will certainly talk about the comments. And for episode 1, y'all guys can get excited. The guest we're having on is a competitive player who has been to many regionals. The highest he ever did was qualifying for day 2 when he could not come to the day 2 of that event. So, again, maybe you'd call that pseudo-competitive. In my world, that's a pretty competitive person. Although he is, don't tell anybody, he is a Drytron player to this day. He is very good at working around the metagame. He is very good at navigating individual games. I think he's a very skilled player, but he's also just a good friend, which is why I'm having him on. And I hope that our conversation will be exciting for all of you dear listeners, probably none of you when this comes out, but maybe in the future there will be some of you. I don't know if there is a view count on that. If the views on this video or the next video or anything to speak of, feel free to just put in the comments, when this video came out, it had 4 views and all of them were him. And in the future, maybe, oh wow, there are now 100 views on that video. That is a very big increase. I don't know. I look forward to what the future holds. And I hope that all of you do too. I guess to wrap up, I'll kind of talk about why I decided to make a podcast in the first place. I have always been interested in the YouTube creator, Twitch creator, content creator sphere. I've always thought it was very interesting. I've always had a lot to talk about, although admittedly, I am probably not the right person. I'm a very inexperienced person, but I think that starting with something casual and small like this is a great way for me to start. Originally, we had talked a lot about doing a progression series, me and my friends, but since none of us had any experience doing anything like that, it always just kind of got blocked up in the planning phase. But here, since a podcast, at least in theory, we'll see how it turns out, is very low barrier to entry. You just have a conversation with your friend, and then you record it, and then you upload it. I think this can be a great gateway into myself and others around me being able to enter the creation sphere on YouTube. And if you want to see that, if you want to see us play progression series, or if you want to see anything really, please subscribe. Please smash that like button. Please tell your friends about this podcast and support us so that we will have the encouragement and the desire to do more. I know that's pretty cheesy, but this is a non-existent community right now. And y'all have a lot of power over what happens. I think that's the real benefit of small creators, like myself, I guess, at this point, is that you can find me when I have nothing, 0 subscribers. You could be the first. And that means you will be a part of something when it becomes more than it was. And not only a part of it, but you can be a founder. You can be the guy who left the comment that I read in episode 2. You could be the guy who recommends a certain rule change in our progression series, and we ended up using it. You know, I think that's really exciting, and I hope all of you think that's exciting too. And I want this video to be an hour long, so I'm going to keep talking. So let's talk a little bit about progression series in general. I am a huge fan of progression series. I think it is a beautiful culmination of opening packs, enjoying jank and retro formats, and also a development of a community. I think that they are an absolutely amazing tool for the growth of a community around a channel and for introducing people to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Oddly enough, since all you have to do is read the cards as you receive them. That huge load that most people have in the beginning is mitigated a lot since you're starting from the very beginning. But likewise, it's such a untrue representation of what formats were like in the past. I think it's unreasonable to pretend otherwise. So all these channels that use priority or draw a card, I think as adding an unnecessary layer of confusion. It's already not going to be an accurate representation. It's more just the taste of how Yu-Gi-Oh! Was during all of these time periods. And if we're going to do that, we might as well make it more cohesive and understandable by playing by modern rules with modern card texts. Obviously, there might be exceptions to that, like, for instance, maybe Sangan only being able to search once per turn errata, or its errata not to be able to use that monster's effects. Maybe something like that will be so impactful to gameplay that we would decide to do that differently. But I think 90% of the time, it would make sense to do things by modern standards, and then only when it is a severe change in gameplay, or rather, when something interesting might happen when you do change it to be the old way. That's when it's fair. In general, I also prefer playoffs than a normal progression. I think a 1v1 promotes too much hate in the main deck for each other, and I just don't think that's very fun, because we've all played with our local friend groups and considered tuning our decks to beating our friends, and I think most of us have made the decision that that's kind of not a cool thing to do. And likewise, with the progression series, all you have is just the "that's not cool, bro" to prevent people from doing that. Whereas if you have a playoffs, you're playing against multiple different people, then you kind of are forced to play in a more broad deck building environment where you have to be more fair with how you build your deck building by not targeting specifically your opponent, instead targeting the format, which is something we all have to do anyway. So I think that's very cool. But I understand the barrier to entry is much higher for that. You have to have several friends, so much harder to record. And to be fair, I will probably not be doing a playoff because it's probably too hard. So I will probably start with a normal progression series, but I'm sure we will twist up and make all sorts of new variations on the current trend, and you can be a part of that by talking in the comments about what you want, how you think the progression formula could be solved, could be made perfect. So go ahead and leave those thoughts below. And thank you for listening. I know this is not even the inaugural episode because it's episode 0. It's more of an introduction. But I talked about a lot of things here. And I think that it feels like a strong start here, me baking in a car at work because the work shift ended early, so I decided to record it here. I don't know if that counts as dedication, but I am dripping in sweat. So I don't know if that tells you how serious I am about this. But I'm looking forward to what the future holds, and I hope you are too. Thank you for your time, and have a nice day. I don't have an outro yet, so Beep boop boo whoop boo. Doo 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 doo. Bwomp womp womp. Stay frosty. I don't know. I'm working on it. Have a good day. And goodbye.